Welcome back to another episode of KaijuVFX. It's been a while. Today we have a Patreon requested tutorial by KaijuX, who asked us to recreate the opening from Godzilla Planet of the Monsters. So today, we are going to be doing just that. He has supplied us with a Photoshop file that will be used to recreate the scene from Planet of the Monsters where we're going through newsreels, learning about the kaiju attacks that have happened across the world. And we're going to be utilizing some new techniques that I have not really shown you guys much of yet in this tutorial to recreate this. So we have a little scene of Godzilla fighting a pre-nanometal modified Gigan, it seems. Very cool. And something that's cool to touch on real quick, thanks to this Photoshop file he has supplied us with, every individual layer in that Photoshop file is actually individually accessible and modifiable in After Effects, which is something that, may interest you a little bit. It's certainly a very cool feature that I've used on a couple of occasions. It is very, very useful in that regard. So, anyway, let's get on to the actual effect. And so, what we're going to do is we're going to create a new camera to start off. We'll just call this camera. And obviously, it doesn't do anything because nothing in this whole composition is 3D yet. So, let's just, bam, make everything 3D. So yeah, now everything's 3D. So move the camera around. But there's no depth. So, we can move the camera in, dolly it, rotate it. But we're not actually getting any depth from this at all. And the reason for that is, well, everything is at the same base position currently. So if we look at the positional values for all these Photoshop layers, you see they all rest at 960x, 540y, and 0z, which means there's no depth. So what we're going to do real quick is we're going to, well, add depth. So let's play around with this real quick. So first we have this sky in the background here, which is obviously going to be the farthest object away in the scene. So let's just take the Z value and push it back a good bit. Let's say maybe 4,000. Then we'll take the scale and we'll just bump it back up to about where it was before, where it covers the whole screen. So now you're already getting some of that good 3D parallaxing, where objects in the distance do not appear to move as fast as those that are closer to the foreground. So, if we dolly in, pan down, and up, we now have some proper depth in this scene, which is fantastic. And we're basically going to be doing this for every layer. But you might notice this is a lot of layers. So if you want a better way to track where each of these individual objects is in 3D space, what you can do is go over here in this little toolbar right below the composition preview window, and where it says active camera, we can click on this, and this actually gives us a whole array of options. Currently, After Effects has it set to active camera by default, which basically means we are viewing this composition through the camera that we have just created. So if we rotate it around, we're actively moving that camera. But we could change it to, say, a left-facing camera, which gives us a straight 90-degree angle to the left of where we were looking. We can do back, which gives us a rear view, right, bottom, all that stuff. Let's go to a custom view real quick. Now, as you can see, we're almost looking at a little diorama of sorts. What we're seeing, this little pink box over here is the After Effects camera. And what we're seeing in this large rectangle that it is projecting is its field of view. So we can see exactly what the camera has in frame or not. And as you can see, the sky is already far off into the background, just like we moved it in Z depth space. And what this is going to help us do is, instead of just reading these numbers on the side over here and guessing where these objects should fit in 3D space, we can instead move them along ourselves and decide where they fit in the depth ourselves. And you can get all sorts of angles that'll let us help figure out where we want everything to be placed. So let's move Godzilla back, and let's kind of just go layer by layer and see where everything should be composited depth-wise. And some objects like this smoke, we can just kind of move backward together because these objects appear to be in the same playing field. Perhaps we'll move this one back a little further, this bigger element here. And one thing to note, obviously, is that, you know, as I covered in our first 3D tutorial in After Effects, when you make something 3D in After Effects, it does not become 3D necessarily, it becomes 2.5D, in that it essentially becomes like a piece of paper almost, where when you're looking at it from straight at the side, you cannot actually tell that the object is there. So that does mean that these objects themselves won't have any depth, but the fact that we are making this scene three-dimensional is going to be working very well on its own for us. So we'll keep playing around. We'll bring this orange haze just in front of that first smoke layer, just to make sure that the blending mode is retained as it covers those elements. And what we can also do is maybe scale it up a bit. And then we have this other orange haze right here, which we will just copy and paste that position from before. We have another haze that will move back to be just before these other elements here. And what you're seeing here is essentially what we'll be doing for every single layer. So I'm going to kind of speed through the rest of this real quick, just so you're not watching me drag elements back and forth for hours on end. Okay, so I am liking where everything is placed so far. So now let's go back to our active camera. And whoa, obviously things have been not properly scaled yet. So let's take a moment real quick and I will rescale everything so that they properly fit the composition. And this doesn't have to be exact. I'm just kind of roughly guessing based off of the elements little border here, and kind of just scaling that up to fit back into the main composition here. So it might not line up perfect, but you know, it gets us pretty much where we need to be. And there we go. So now let's take our camera tool. We'll press C just for a little shortcut there. So let's right click and dolly in. And look at that, we've got some neat 3D parallaxing going on now, as all of our elements are now in different depths in 3D space. And I honestly might go in and beef this up even further, maybe make the space between Godzilla and Gigan a little bit more apparent and all of that. But just for sake of showing what we've got here now, let's take the camera tool and we'll keyframe the orientation and position. And we'll just go forward in the timeline a little bit, 5 or 6 seconds, and just, you know, maybe pan in, pan right, crane down, dolly in a little more. Okay, so let's preview this real quick. And there we go. As you can see, we now have some great 3D depth going on. And we can actually alter the camera's path a little bit more. If we go into our custom view again, and let's look at the path that our camera goes on here. Maybe we'll make it sort of curve to the side a little bit before it comes in to its final resting place. That is looking pretty cool, if I do say so myself. I'm kind of liking that orbital path a little bit. So again, real quick, like I said, I'm gonna kind of go back and alter the depth of some of these, and bring Gigan back a little bit and all that. Alright, so I'm feeling happier with the placing of objects that we have going on now. So real quick, I'm gonna do one last camera movement to wrap up the Planet of the Monsters style. and that's the little zoom in that happens toward the end where we kind of fly past everything else. So after these keyframes, let's go forward maybe a second or so. We'll change up the positioning, and we'll kind of dolly and fly in past Gigan's mouth right here. Now obviously that happens pretty quick and pretty abrupt from that keyframe there. We're moving like soft and smooth, and all of a sudden, bam, we're flying in. So let's highlight those keyframes right there. We'll right click on them, go to keyframe assistant, and we'll easy ease out. So that means that once once we approach these keyframes, they will continue to move at the same speed as they were before, but instead of blasting off, we ease out of that positional value a little bit more as we travel toward Gigan. So that wraps up the camera movement, but one thing that I am noticing is that we can kind of tell these are still images. So I think something that would be good to do here is to add a little bit of life into this whole composition here. And we'll do that in a number of ways. So first off, let's have these monsters doing a little something more. And to do that, we are going to use our good pal, the puppet pin tool. So let's solo Godzilla real quick. And so we're going to make sure we have Godzilla selected, and before we can add any puppet points, we have to pre-compose this layer. So let's hit Control-Shift-C, and we'll just call this Godzilla Comp. And we have to make this a 3D layer again, but we don't have to fret too much about replacing him. We'll just go into that composition, copy the positional property from there, as well as the scale, and bam, as you can see, he fits right back in with that scene, just like we left him. So let's use the puppet pin tool again, and we're essentially just going to click on different parts of Godzilla that it would seem appropriate to have joints, essentially. So we'll have some on his arms and all that. Okay, so now if we go to move Godzilla around, we can kind of bend him and twist him a little bit, but we're running into some odd issues where, even though these objects do not look like they're touching, they're still being considered part of the same mesh, basically, which that's what the puppet pin tool runs off of. It's essentially a mesh warp of an object. So what we can do is if we click on the puppet pin tool, and we can show the mesh here, as you can see, this is encompassing a little bit too much, and is causing some elements to overlap in a sense. So what we can do is we can turn the expansion down to maybe just 2, and that actually separates some of those elements for us. Actually, pretty much all the ones that we would want separated, so we are in much better shape now. So let's disable the mesh real quick. We'll open up our keyframes real quick. And let's disable keyframes there, and we'll just have them all start at the same point here. So now, bring these to the start of the composition, and what we can do is we're just going to kind of go through and, animate Godzilla as much as we can with the still image. We will have some limitations, obviously, even though we know that this tail is not technically part of Godzilla's leg, the mesh considers it so because it has no idea of separation of objects, and there's nothing behind this still image to separate it. But we can move his tail around, and if we add an extra pin around his foot, that would actually probably help a little bit. Yeah, so we can flip his tail a little bit, move his back, move his arm, move that little bottom one too. And also, we're seeing that we're getting some weird overlap, where this part of the arm is overlapping the front, which obviously shouldn't be the case. So we're going to go into the puppet overlap tool, and it basically lets us set points we want objects to be behind. So if we set the in front percent to -7, and then we animate this, we're kind of getting there. Probably need to set it to a little bit higher there. and increase the extent of that little point that we just put down. So we'll just get it just enough to cover that front hand. And there we go. Now it goes behind his arm as it should. And we might do that for any points that are acting a bit wonky. So we already did a tutorial that covers the puppet pin and animating still images like this. So I'm going to go ahead and just animate this myself. We'll have Godzilla roar a little bit, and I'll also repeat the process for Gigan. But just to save time, let's blaze right through this. Alright, so now Godzilla and Gigan are kind of squaring off a little bit. Not the most advanced animation again, but you know, with still images, we've done a pretty decent job here of making them look a little bit more lively. Now it's our job to make the rest of this look a little more lively. So some stuff that I'm going to do is I'm going to take these smoke elements and animate their scale and position. Just as we kind of go on throughout the composition, maybe we'll unsolo them. And as we reach the end of our timeline, we'll have them sort of grow and expand perhaps. And we'll do the same to some of these front elements as well, animate the scale and position. And with some of these we could add a turbulent displace perhaps, with some of these smoke elements. Maybe make them a little bit wavy perhaps. So if we evolve this, smoke might look a little bit like it's billowing and spilling out everywhere. Make it a subtle effect. And obviously something else that you can do to spice this up just as much would be to add some other stock footage elements that move around. Perhaps some ACTIONVFX products. I know I plug them all the time, but they're incredible, let's be honest. You know, for example, you could add some fire sparks, make them 3D, we'll slow them down, and we'll, you know, again, go back to that custom view so that we can place these proper in 3D space. And as you can see, that alone adds so much life to this shot. Just that extra little bit of animation. And this is the kind of stuff that they do in the Monster Planet opening to make these shots look more natural and, well, creative. And lively. Like, you know, just pouring through the sparks and all the flames of this battle, it really helps to accentuate that this is an actual thing that took place instead of just a photograph that someone took. It adds a lot of style and flair. But obviously, that's all stuff that you can keep experimenting with on your own, and I think we've made something that looks pretty great and extremely close to what Polygon did in Planet of the Monsters. So, you know, use this tutorial to your heart's content to make all sorts of Godzilla Monster Planet fan openings where we see every kaiju in existence. You know, I mean, you could if you wanna. You could have this camera fly past Gigan and reveal like 10 more monsters behind there. That's the power of this tutorial. But anyways, I am glad that you guys enjoyed. I hope you did and found it helpful and useful. If you have any other effect tutorial requests or simple stuff like this in After Effects, then consider supporting us on Patreon, where for $10 a month, that tier lets you get one KaijuVFX video request that gets pushed to the very front of the line to be done at top priority. Otherwise, sound off on the comments of what you'd like to see done in the future, as I am hoping to work through some requests that people have dropped in there as this series goes on. So again, thank you all for watching. I'll catch you guys next time.
Thanks to all of our current Patreon supporters, including Deadzilla, Goji73, Liquid Pestar, Justice, Hayden Bell, Project Godzilla, GWRzilla, Mason Ramone, That One Godzilla Fan, Ultriob, William Zorio, KaijuX, Johnny Sacco, and Jeff King. If you want to see your name at the end of each of our videos as well, in addition to some other awesome rewards, then be sure to stop by patreon.com/DaikaijuLegends.